For our next session, I'm very pleased to introduce Mike Candle, Managing Director at The Customer Lab. Mike shows how digital transformation drives company growth by aligning the digital experience with the total customer experience and the sea change drivers. Please welcome industry expert Mike Candle.
Hey everyone, glad to be with you today. Thanks for joining us. We are going to dig into how to digitally transform your business and create wow factor customer experiences today. This is a topic that I think is dear to most of our hearts. It's especially gotten a lot of attention with the global pandemic. And so I'd like to share some experiences that I've been having with my clients and with companies in the past that hopefully will help you get your team going. And so we'll talk a little bit at a high level strategically about how to do this, and then we'll drill down into some specifics. We'll love to start out with a quote from a famous management consultant that's been probably studied for years now. This is Peter Drucker, and he says the greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence, but it's to act with yesterday's logic. And unfortunately, we've seen a lot of companies that are still kind of clinging to that. Even before the pandemic, it was pretty obvious that digital was the future, but a lot of companies that were uncomfortable with that or didn't have the talent or were hoping things might change just didn't jump with that. And so now I think you're seeing, even with smaller companies, the acceleration of that. And I think you can probably come up with your favorite pandemic example of that, where you've got a local shop or a restaurateur or some business that maybe even government agencies that have never done anything remotely, and all of a sudden they've been thrust into this. So part of what I hope you take away today is that urgency is better if you inflict it upon yourself than waiting for the market to do that. And I think that's what Drucker was talking about here. Another famous management consultant, Dilbert, often talks about how, it's his boss is saying it's the highest priority that we are looking for the best experience for our customers. But when times get tough, then we're going to back off. And you see this as well, right? Even in the pandemic times with certain industries that have been hard hit in travel, where some companies have doubled down on the policies that don't help customers as opposed to embracing that and looking for opportunities to grow their business, even during a trying time. So how do we do that, and why should we do that, right? And I love this figure. This is from a study that talks about how consumers are going to pay more for better customer experiences. Fred Reichheld talked about in his book on the Ultimate Customer years ago about this whole concept of bad profits. And if you don't deliver something that is of value and feels like you have the best interest of the customer at heart, customers can tell that they're going to go elsewhere, or they're going to dial back their spend, even maybe if you're in a more of a monopolistic industry. Another figure that I've seen play out over and over again in my career is this idea that a small increase in customer retention will boost your profits exponentially. And this is a Bain study that says 5% increase in customer retention can boost your profits by 25%. And that's on average. It varies a little bit by industry, but this whole idea of begin with the end in mind. If you're going to go out and design a new digital experience, you need to work your way back from what does great look like from a customer's perspective. What problem are you really solving for them, and how are you delivering on that promise so that they feel like they want to invest more in your brand and into that experience. So I'd love to throw this framework out for you to consider. I keep seeing this over and over again, and I'm not sure how obvious it is sometimes to leaders, but it used to be you could be really good at one of these three disciplines and dominate your market. And it has transformed really over the last 10, 15 years. The market leaders were getting good at two of these things. And now, almost for survival's sake, you have to be good at all three. And so this idea of customer-backed design, leading with the customer value first, and figuring out how to deliver that better than somebody else, Then this idea of execution, we've seen a number of companies in the past 20, 30 years that led with execution. They were just very good at repeatedly delivering on that cash cow product. But that's not enough either, right? You're seeing now millennials and younger want an experience or from a company that they believe shares their values and that they can tell the authenticity of the individuals they're interacting with, or even the authenticity of a digital experience. And that's a very different world than maybe some of us grew up in. So love to share with you some approaches and some examples of how to be good at all these three things. And to me, you can kind of look at some of the usual suspects like Disney and Amazon and Intuit and others that do these things very well. But it's also a good point to maybe stop and do an assessment on your company and say, where are you good and where could you get better at these individual disciplines? So let's take a look at design. I think a lot of people are investing here, which is great. I didn't bring a slide to show you, but there's studies that have been done that companies that are really good at customer-centered design are outperforming stock market indices by almost 200+%. It's amazing. And that gap has been increasing over time as they've redone this study. So if you're not thinking about design, obviously there's a benefit to it from a financial perspective, but also from a customer employee perspective as well. The first piece of this structure is really around this whole idea of customer problem solution. Lead with the customer, lead with the problem, work your way back to a solution. A lot of times we fall in love with our ideas before we really tested them with the market. And so the whole idea of UX and digital design is going out first and assuming we don't know, right? And that we're out there with a hypothesis, but it hasn't been proven until we get real evidence from the customers or from the market. The other idea here is to use ethnographic research, not just quantitative research, and get out and talk to real customers. In the pandemic times, it's done by video or by phone, but don't just rely on big, huge, massive data studies. Those are important to narrow things, but you've got to get that empathy from customers. You need to run real experiments and prototypes to see how they behave, because what they tell you is always different, or mostly different than what they're going to do. And then make sure you have evidence to base those decisions on. And you've probably heard in disciplines like Lean Startup, you want to pivot, persevere, iterate quickly and rapidly. So companies that are good at this Uber's one example, is always running experiments. Thousands of experiments are in flight. If you're a native digital company, that's a little easier, but still that whole DNA of assuming we're wrong and then continually testing to see if our ideas are going to work or not. Secondly, then, this whole idea of delivery and execution, I won't spend a lot of time here because I think everyone's really good at it or getting good at it. If you're a big company, you've had to be good at it. But I do think there's a few points worth calling out here. First, this idea that you need to deploy and analyze things really well. The idea of creating value at scale. So Amazon is very good at this. They try to, every idea they test, they want to see how big can it really get. So are you able to scale those ideas that test well in the marketplace? And the idea of ownership as well. Do you have silos in your organization that are prohibiting effective efficiency and delivery of end-to-end experiences? Or have you somehow sliced through that? And a lot of companies now are adopting this model of a customer experience owner that cuts across silos and has some authority and level of budget control across all of those functional heads. So I'd really encourage you to look deeply into those types of structures as well. And then thirdly, this idea of culture, won't spend much time here either, but I think the idea of it having a noble purpose or a inspirational purpose for why you exist beyond just shareholder value is really important to attract the top talent, especially in tech right now. There's a shortage in most markets of really talented technologists. To be able to attract them, they have to feel like they're on purpose, on mission, especially younger employees. Shared values then clicking down from that purpose and saying, what's acceptable here and what's not acceptable? How are we going to lead? And I love some examples of companies where number one or number two on that values list is customer centricity or customer obsession. Amazon talks a lot about this idea of we want to be the most obsessed customer centric company in the world, and the product is less important, right? It's that set of values and purpose that drive the mission of the company. And then behaviors, getting really to how do you measure? Are people living out those values, or are they all independent free agents? And we probably worked at some companies like that as well. So you can, again, kind of understand some of the companies that are really good at this, where the brand promise, the product, the digital experience, and the culture of the company align tightly. Places like Apple Retail, where they talk about in this whole idea of enriching people's lives. It's not just about selling a Mac or selling an iPhone, but it's what am I going to do in that person's life through the experience that I deliver. Warby Parker, ING, Slack, there's a number of other companies you can kind of look at that have really tightly woven together their value statements and their promises with the digital and their physical experiences as well. And I think, like I said earlier, getting out of the building is one of those things that becomes an expectation. I'll give you a couple examples from my past, working with a software company in the past called Intuit, which provides tax software to businesses and to individuals. We would send out every year our product managers at least once a week near the end of our tax season here in the States, for them to spend time living in a branch or a CPA's office, an accountant's office, so that they could see what happens, see how the customer's using their tools, watch where the failures are happening online, understanding the pain the customer is going through. And usually day one, they're pretty nice to you, right? They're like, hey, we love your product. Thanks for being here. Day two, they're getting a little more honest with you and saying, hey, how do I do this? This isn't working well. By 3 or 4, they're starting to cuss at you and say, hey, your software just blew up my printer, and why does a screen lock up, or whatever it may be. So that whole idea of getting out of the building or doing it virtually now so that you can experience that pain. And then the idea of even internally with your digital experiences, when I worked at Capital One, a large US bank, we had customer designers that would sit with our reps, and they would actually watch the rep do the workflow on the call center screens, and then from that redesign the screens, just like you would do it from a UX project on the outside. We're doing that on the inside as well. So just a few principles that kind of reinforce some of these examples. The whole idea of falling in love with your customer's problem first and not your solution. Nobody wants to hear that their baby's ugly, but they often will when they get out in the field and show somebody a product or talk to them about the existing product. So that whole idea of just holding back and assuming that you're wrong. The other piece is to know that value is defined by the customer and not us. We oftentimes will make a point of trying to convince the customer of what we have. I've been in a number of UX examples where we put a prototype or a storyboard in front of a customer, and they get a little upset about it or say, that's not going to work for me, and the team gets defensive. You really have to embrace that and see that feedback as a gift and try to drive through that to understand what the real pain is that the customer's having. And I mentioned this earlier, assume you're wrong. There's about 80%, it varies by industry, but what I see in my work is about 80% of the time, we're at least somewhat wrong with a new product or a new process or a new software app that we're putting out in the market. So you've got to get out there and test that. I want to share with you a few examples of this at work. The disease prevention app, this is a customer that we worked with, and we were working in a really tight time frame using a lot of these principles and saying, hey, what could we do in short sprints, 30-day, 60-day, 90-day? This one ended up being 6 months, but this team was actually able to interact with hundreds of customers during that time, run over 40 experiments with real prototypes, and get to a point where they had very high confidence that this app was going to be used by consumers, and that there was also going to be the prototype at a high adoption level. So when they're going out the door, they've already had some sense of success with this customer. The next one is a large company that has a number of decentralized customers that use their equipment, and their equipment has never been connected. The individual locations haven't been connected, and they were literally sending service techs out to these locations to update software on the machines. And this company was able to do what normally would take three to 4 years and multiple $1 million, do that for much less in only 90 days. Working with multiple teams, they were able to create a cloud-based solution that could link all of these locations and link the equipment, which would have both huge savings on the cost side, but also great savings from or revenue enhancement from a system as a service platform that they were building. They were able to take this out and get this architecture validated with the key stakeholders in these customers. So B2B company, they were able to vet that and engage vendor partners within the 90 days and start to test technologies that they thought would actually work and help build this platform, and using some industry standards so it would be quickly adopted. And they were able to go and create confidence and enthusiasm internally, which is often the biggest challenge in a big company, to get the funding and the resourcing to take the next step to actually start building that platform out. So those are just a couple examples. I would encourage you, if you're not already using a number of these digital design tools, to start building that capability within your company. Things like empathy interviews. This is seemingly easy, but not, right? You've got sometimes people that are afraid to talk to customers. They don't know how to engage with them well, or they do get defensive. So being able to coach and build that craft, if you will, of customer engagement, being able to embed with customers. The example I shared with the tax accountant office, if you're able to find ways to do that, where you're able to spend time as an employee, if you will, with your customers and really see the pain and the problems that they have. The other piece is this whole idea of being scrappy but not crappy. Can you build test prototypes out of paper, or can you build it on an iPad and take it out in the field and show people, or can you do something that doesn't cost a lot of money? We've worked with clients that their lead times are 3-4 years. They're redoing machining and tools inside a factory, and if you bet wrong 3 years later, you're in big trouble, right? So this idea of how do you get market insights quickly, and that are not vanity and just kind of stroking your own ideas, but saying, hey, this is really real. We know that the customers were offering us credit cards or signing purchase orders or whatever it took to get that true evidence or that signal from the market. The other piece is journey mapping, and I know a lot of companies have been doing this and talking about it a lot. This is actually an example here in this photo of some journey mapping we've been doing online with some great tools, but a lot of companies aren't involving customers in that. So how do you engage your customers in the journey mapping process, both in the current state and the future state? And then the last piece I would leave you with is this idea of organizing like a startup. Small teams, at Intuit, we call them 2 pizza teams. So anything bigger that took more than 2 pizzas to feed was too big. I've worked at companies where we've had 32 people teams, and they're reporting to steering committees of 20 people and an executive steering team of 10 people. That just slows you down. So you can actually make much more progress with smaller teams, with almost an investment structure of an investor board, and have those teams reporting out regularly and based on the evidence, just like an investor would. They'll get more capital, they'll get more time, they'll get more resources. So another way of thinking about how do you do digital design at scale in a rapid way to be able to meet the needs of the changing marketplace. So that's my spiel. I hope it was helpful for you today. My name is Mike Kendall again. If you have any questions, looking forward to answering those. Feel free to reach out to me, and I appreciate the time with you today, and hopefully you'll be able to take some of those lessons and put those to work tomorrow.
Thank you so much, Mike, for your presentation. My favorite phrase must be, fall in love with the customer's problem, not your solution. Plus, the combination of design, delivery, and culture can provide a powerful way to think with the customer in mind. Absolutely, because such a small increase in retention can lead to greater profits. Thank you again, Mike Kendall, Managing Director of The Customer Lab.